Have you ever wanted to just disappear? To delete everything, go quiet on everyone, and rebuild yourself somewhere no one is watching? That urge is not cowardice, and it is not some character flaw you need to apologize for. It is a biological defense mechanism, older than language itself. In the time we spend together here, we are going to walk through the psychology of rebuilding a life in secret, and why silence, uncomfortable as it is, might be the single most powerful tool you have. Let's start with a scene you probably already know, from the inside. It's late at night, a sudden surge of motivation hits you out of nowhere, and you decide that tomorrow is the day everything changes. You are going to get in shape, launch the business, finally overhaul the parts of your life that have been quietly failing you. And then you make what feels like a small, harmless decision. You tell someone. Maybe it's a subtle hint dropped on social media. Maybe it's a text to your best friend, or an announcement at the dinner table. They respond exactly the way you hoped. They tell you how proud they are. They assure you that you are going to crush it. For a few intoxicating minutes, you feel like you have already won. Then the days pass. Weeks go by, and you haven't taken a single real step. And when those same people eventually ask how the project is going, a sick, sinking feeling settles into your stomach. You end up lying, making excuses, or quietly pretending you changed your mind. Why does this keep happening, over and over, to people who are anything but lazy? The answer isn't a character defect. It's a neurological trap, and most of us walk directly into it without ever realizing it's there. In behavioral psychology, there's a concept called social reality, studied extensively by researcher Peter Gollwitzer. His research uncovered something almost unfair about how the human brain works. It struggles to tell the difference between the satisfaction of talking about a goal and the satisfaction of actually achieving it. The moment you announce your plan and someone acknowledges it, your brain quietly convinces itself that a piece of the work is already done. You get a small, premature reward, a taste of the recognition and respect that should have been earned through the actual doing, delivered instead for free, in advance, for nothing. Every time you talk about what you're going to do, you are, in a very real sense, leaking the exact fuel you would need to go do it. You're trading the sustained energy required for a marathon, for a brief, cheap round of applause at the starting line, before the race has even begun. This is why building something in silence isn't a stylistic choice. Nothing. Silence is deeply uncomfortable, precisely because it removes the shortcut. When you keep your plans to yourself, the only way your brain can get its reward is by actually finishing the task. Silence traps the fuel inside the engine, instead of letting it vent uselessly into the open air. And in doing so, it forces your mind to crave the real outcome instead of settling for a cheap substitute. Now let's talk about what happens after a public failure, because this is where the instinct to disappear gets loudest. When you go through a massive, visible collapse, a humiliating financial loss, a breakup everyone saw coming apart in real time, the loss of a career you had quietly built your entire identity around, something inside you genuinely breaks. But if you look closely at that pain, you'll notice something uncomfortable and true. The sharpest part of the suffering is rarely the loss itself. The deepest wound usually comes from being watched while it happens. Psychologists sometimes describe this state as having a bleeding ego. When your ego is bleeding, the last thing you want is an audience. You don't want unsolicited advice. You don't want pity is a strange, uniquely corrosive emotion to be on the receiving end of. It shines a spotlight directly onto your rawest insecurities, and quietly reinforces a dynamic where you are the broken one and they are the whole one, stripping away exactly the dignity and autonomy you need most in that moment. If you try to rebuild in full public view, you subject yourself to a kind of invisible, constant surveillance. Everyone who witnessed the fall is now, consciously or not, but your nervous system doesn't experience them as kindness. How are you holding up? Have you figured things out yet? But your nervous system doesn't experience them as kindness. It experiences them as a threat, because every single check-in forces you to relive the very failure you are trying to move past. There's a real neurological cost to this. Being observed while vulnerable drives cortisol levels up, and chronically elevated cortisol keeps the body locked in a fight-or-flight state. Here is the actual scientific problem with that. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for creativity, logical reasoning, and long-term strategic thinking, gets suppressed under that kind of chronic stress. In plain terms, you cannot effectively rebuild your life while your brain is too busy managing the stress of being watched. This is exactly why the urge to vanish, to go quiet, to step off the grid entirely, can hit with such force after a hard fall. Modern culture tends to label this instinct as avoidance, as running away, sometimes even as cowardice. But evolutionary biology tells a very different story. When an apex predator is badly wounded in the wild, it doesn't stay out in the open. It retreats to a dark, quiet den and isolates itself completely until the bleeding stops. The desire to disappear after a public wound isn't weakness. It's a deeply embedded survival instinct, doing exactly what it was built to do. Your brain is asking for a sterile, unobserved space to perform emergency repair work on a shattered sense of identity, and it needs the audience removed before the wound has any real chance of closing. If you've spent time online, you've probably seen the highly aestheticized version of this process, what people often call monk mode. The 4 a.m. wake-ups, the black coffee, the stoic philosophy, the moody gym footage shot in low light. It looks cinematic. It looks powerful. But here's the uncomfortable truth. That's not what rebuilding in secret actually looks like. That's when you genuinely disappear, when you cut the noise, step fully into the background, and commit to doing the real work of repairing yourself. You eventually arrive at a stretch of time psychologists sometimes call the messy middle. The first week or two can feel almost euphoric, full of a sudden sense of control. But by month 2 or 3, the novelty of the new routine wears off, and the silence you built for yourself starts to feel deafening. You're not just sipping coffee and reading books in soft lighting. You're staring at the ceiling at 2 in the morning, wrestling with anxiety, wondering seriously whether you've made an enormous mistake. During this stretch, you will lose people. Not always through some dramatic blow-up, often just through quiet drift. You've stopped being available to play the role they had unconsciously assigned you. The group chat goes quiet. The weekend invitations stop arriving. And slowly, you start to see how many of your relationships were built on proximity and shared habits, rather than any real, durable connection. In that sudden emptiness, your mind will play tricks on you. This is precisely the point where the overwhelming majority of people give up. The isolation gets heavy enough that they retreat back into old patterns, texting the person they shouldn't, returning to familiar distractions, anything to escape the echo of their own unresolved thoughts. Texting the person, but if you can stay in that discomfort a little longer, something significant starts to happen, a process close to what's sometimes described as ego death. To rebuild a house properly, you first have to tear out the rotten foundation underneath it. In much the same way, the old version of you often has to be dismantled before a new version has room to take shape. The ego does not go quietly. It resists, hard. In the silence, your mind will replay every embarrassing mistake, every painful rejection, every moment you fell short, and it will try to convince you that the isolation itself is proof of failure, rather than proof of healing. This period isn't a beautiful cinematic montage. It's closer to psychological surgery without anesthesia. Messy, uncomfortable, and demanding real mourning. You have to genuinely grieve the person you used to be, and the imagined future that came along with that old identity. You're shedding a layer of yourself, and shedding always leaves you feeling raw and exposed for a while. So if you happen to be in the middle of this right now, quietly rebuilding, feeling entirely alone, wondering if you're slowly losing your grip, take a breath. You are not losing your mind. What you're feeling is closer to the literal sensation of neural pathways rewiring themselves. If the silence hurt, most modern self-help advice, when someone experiences a major setback, converges on the same handful of instructions. Forgive yourself, practice self-compassion, release the shame, surround yourself with positivity. I want to offer something closer to the opposite. Don't rush to let go of your shame. Shame isn't automatically a toxic emotion that needs to be meditated away. And it isn't proof of some character flaw. From a neurological standpoint, intense negative emotion, shame, regret, humiliation, is one of the most powerful known catalysts. Break old habitual patterns and build entirely new connection. It changes when it perceives that survival genuinely depends on it. Deep, visceral shame pushes the nervous system into a state of heightened alertness, making its pathways unusually malleable, almost as if biology is trying to burn a permanent lesson in, to make sure the same painful mistake never happens again. Here's where a lot of people unintentionally sabotage their own progress. They can't tolerate the pressure that shame creates, so they vent it away. They call a friend. They post about it online. They go looking for people who will reassure them that it wasn't really their fault, that they did the best they could under the circumstances. Venting, in this context, functions like a pressure valve. It delivers a small hit of relief, a brief serotonin bump, but it also releases the very energy that was meant to fuel real change. Without that internal pressure intact, transformation rarely follows. Instead, the pain gets numbed, and the same cycle tends to repeat itself a few months down the line. This leads to a second, more deliberate idea: learning to work with your shame rather than discharging it. Instead of fleeing the humiliation of a past failure, the ache of a lost relationship, or the embarrassment of financial hardship, the more useful move is to consciously contain that energy rather than scatter it. Think of it the way you'd think about a nuclear reactor. Left uncontained, it's dangerous, capable of damaging everything nearby. But properly contained, under real pressure, in something like sustained, deliberate silence, that same energy is capable of producing enormous, sustained output. On the mornings you wake up at 5 and feel utterly depleted. On the days you're staring at a blank page wanting to quit. On the days the isolation feels genuinely unbearable. Motivation, as a feeling, will not be reliable enough to carry you. It's a weak, fleeting emotional state at the best of times. What can carry you instead is a deliberate return to that contained reservoir, the memory of exactly how it felt to be looked down on, the particular tone of voice someone used when they pitied you, the sting of falling short in front of people who were watching. Used carefully, that concentrated, difficult fuel can be redirected into doing the actual work in front of you. This isn't about cultivating self-hatred. It's about respecting the sheer power available in your own pain, rather than letting it dissipate uselessly into the air. Rebuilding in secret isn't emotional suppression. It's a decision to stop spending that energy on people who were never going to genuinely carry any of the weight with you, and to conserve it instead for the work of becoming someone sturdier. With that foundation in place, it's worth turning to something more practical: how to actually structure a period like this so it protects you rather than breaking you. Understanding the psychology of isolation is only useful if it comes paired with a workable framework. A meaningful rebuild tends to require somewhere around 6 months of largely uninterrupted focus. That's roughly the amount of time it takes to break deeply grooved behavioral patterns, lay down new neural pathways, and build a foundation sturdy enough not to collapse the first time real pressure is applied. Call it, if you like, a 6-month quiet period, and it tends to run on 3 fairly simple operating rules. The first rule is no dramatic exits. When people decide to withdraw and focus on themselves, ego often pushes them towards some kind of announcement. A black screen on social media captioned, "Taking some time to focus on myself," or a long, emotional message to friends, explaining exactly why space is needed. Resist that instinct. Announcing a departure is often just another disguised bid for attention. A way of quietly saying, "Notice that I am leaving." If the intent is genuine, the exit doesn't need an audience or an explanation. You simply stop posting, stop updating your status, stop checking in on everyone else's updates, and quietly step out of the arena. Real silence doesn't require a press release. The second rule is a kind of deliberate information restraint. Obviously, complete disappearance isn't realistic. How things are going. It helps to recognize that, more often than not, these questions aren't really about wanting to help. They're a way for people to measure their own trajectory against yours, gathering data points to judge whether you're doing better or worse than they are. The useful response is to give as little as possible, something vague, calm, and entirely unremarkable. Just keeping my head down, focused on work, taking it day by day, without volunteering the new routine, the business plan, or the reading list, with nothing concrete to build a judgment out of. Most people eventually stop. Once the noise has been cut and the information has stopped flowing outward, you're left in a kind of vacuum. No one is there to cheer the 5 a.m. wake up. No one is validating the late night effort. The only thing holding the structure together is a private promise made to yourself, repeated mechanically, with no expectation of applause. Sustain that for 6 months, and something genuinely valuable tends to emerge, a kind of psychological independence. When no one is in a position to tell you you're doing it wrong, the process becomes entirely your own. Eventually, you arrive at the far end of that timeline. You've learned to work with your own shame, rather than dumping it out prematurely. You've kept your information close. And now comes the part people rarely talk about honestly: reemergence. Before stepping back into view, it's worth being honest about one more thing. For most people, the initial spark behind disappearing to rebuild is, if we're being candid, a little petty. If you trace the urge back to its root, a real part of it usually involves some version of wanting proof, wanting to build something undeniable, in private, and then reveal it to everyone who doubted, pitied, or walked away. Wanting to build something undeniable, in private. Anger and ego are often excellent at getting something started. even if they're poor long-term fuel. Here's the twist that tends to surprise people by the time the work is actually done. By the time the underlying patterns have genuinely shifted, by the time months of consistent, unwitnessed effort have quietly rewired old habits into new ones, something in how you relate to other people's opinions tends to shift too. The day the goal is finally reached, the anticipated satisfaction of their shock or their admiration often turns out to matter far less than expected. The external validation you were quietly craving 6 months earlier can end up feeling almost hollow, because somewhere along the way, you got used to acknowledging your own progress without anyone else in the room. You stop operating on the same frequency as people who are still performing for an audience, because you spent half a year learning to function without one. When you do eventually step back into view, there's usually no need for an announcement, no dramatic reveal, no attempt to prove anything out loud. The change tends to be visible anyway, in how you carry yourself, in your consistency, in the quiet, unforced weight of having actually done the work. But you haven't just made some improvements. You've built a version of yourself that no longer depends quite so heavily on being watched, understood, or approved of by a crowd. If any part of this resonates with where you are right now, take it as permission to trust the discomfort a little longer than feels natural. The isolation, the shame, the strange silence where applause used to be, none of it is a sign that something has gone wrong. More often, it's a sign that the real work is finally underway. Give it the time it actually needs, protect it from an audience, and let the results, whenever they arrive, speak for themselves.